Hello everyone, Gaara here. This weekend the EU preliminaries are coming up. The deck lists have been submitted. I want to take a look at 10 lineups of some of the most well-known players and what their overall strategy is and talk a little bit about it. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So Thijs decided to bring Jade Druid, the new Kazakus Priest, Token Shaman and Jaina Mage. What can we say about this lineup? So it is very easy to predict that Thijs plans on banning Druid. How can I say that Thijs wants to ban Druid? So first of all, Jaina Mage is known to be, or the old Burn Mage plus Jaina, I just call it the Jaina Burn Mage, is notoriously very weak against Jade Druid. So it makes sense to ban Jade Druid in that regard. And the way how Conquest works is that you usually try to hard target one specific deck that is fairly easy to predict from your opponent. Another indication for the Druid ban is Skulking Geist. As you guys can see, there's no Skulking Geist in any of the decks. And the third indicator is, I would say, the Token Shaman. The Token Shaman is actually very weak against the new Jade Druid just because of Spreading Plague, and almost everyone is playing double Spreading Plague. So is Thijs. My guess is, if you look at how the decks are tagged, the Druid has double Doomsayer, the Mage has double Doomsayer, Priest has obviously a lot of anti-aggressive tools, that Thijs is trying to target aggro decks. In the last preliminaries, most of the people qualified with aggro decks and a lot of people brought aggro decks. If your prediction is that a lot of people will bring aggro decks besides Jade Druid and Kazakus Priest, I think a lot of people predict those two decks, then hard targeting them with a super anti-aggro double Spreading Plague, double Doomsayer Jade Druid. Freeze Mage is like like Burn Jaina Mage is the best anti-aggro deck. I've playtested a lot of different decks on the ladder, and from my experience I had the highest win rate against aggressive decks with Jaina Burn Mage. Now you have two stabilizers. Also he goes for the Doomsayer package, so more anti-aggro, and from all the aggressive decks, the deck that is the best versus other aggressive decks is Shaman. I would say that Thijs' strategy is to ban Jade Druid, as I said, no Skulking Geist in the Reno Priest, so that's like the biggest indicator for it. And bring in decks that are pretty weak against Jade Druid with the Jaina Mage and the Token Shaman, and he brings decks that are very tagged versus aggro, so Thijs expects a lot of aggressive decks and a Jade Druid from every lineup, and is trying to, you know, zone out the aggressive decks and get a win through that. So I'm very curious to see how that is gonna work out. When I looked at over the lineups quickly, I've seen a lot of aggressive decks in addition to Kazakus and Jade Druid, but let's take a look at more lineups and what other people's strategies are. So the next players lineup I wanna talk about is Tyler's lineup. Very interesting, almost the same deck as Thijs, as you guys can see. Again, the Jade Druid, the Reno Priest and Jaina Mage. The only difference to Thijs' lineup is the Control Paladin. It is a very greedy Nazov Control Paladin, but still very tagged against aggro. So not too many targets to resurrect with the Nazov, which is very interesting. It makes me wonder, like, is it really worth to run Nazov in a deck like this? As you guys can see, there's like no Cairn in the deck or other defender minions besides Tyrion, so I'm not sure how this is gonna work out. I don't think the Nazov is good, but very anti-aggro with a random Nazov. I think Elise should be a little bit better if you don't run any defender minions whatsoever besides the Tyrion. He runs Golakka on top of double Doomsayer, right? Again, same as Thijs, but even more attacked versus aggro. In his Druid, he doesn't just have the double Doomsayer as well, but a Golakka on top of it, in top of the double Spreading Plague, even more anti-aggro than Thijs. So he pretty much expects the same, a lot of aggro and the Jade Druid. His ban should be a Jade Druid as well. As you can see, no Skulking Geist in either the Priest or the Paladin, which is usually a common tag. The Mage is very weak against Jade Druid as well, so very similar strategy, expects a lot of aggressive decks, but he decided to bring the Control Paladin because he feels more confident with the Paladin to beat aggro decks than with his Shaman, which is very interesting. Something that you definitely have to keep in mind is this is a deck that he thinks has a better shot at beating or getting a win against Kazakus Priest, because most of these players expect Jade Druid and Kazakus Priest to be in every lineup, which seems to be correct so far. Both players, the Tyler and Thijs, had the Kazakus Priest, and the difference is that Thijs brought the Token Shaman to get a win against aggressive decks, and he thinks it is better versus Kazakus Priest, and Tyler thinks the Nazov anti-aggro Control Paladin is better. So that's the biggest difference. They expect the same decks from the opponents, but have one very different deck. Another interesting thing is because both players had the Jaina Mage, he doesn't have that much healing. He still has the Ragnaros and the Forbidden Healing, and I think the Control Paladin should be better versus the Jaina Mage than the Token Shaman. So considering that Tyler has more anti-aggro attacks with the random Golakka crawlers, and his Paladin should be better versus mages, and if you expect mage to be the third most popular deck, I think that Tyler's lineup should have a slightly bigger edge than Thijs' lineup overall. It really comes down to how both decks are performing versus the Priest, and the Priest is very good at taking out Shaman boards, and I think that the Shaman will just run out of resources, but then again, Shaman can just high roll with double Gangster Evolve, so if you're having a good day, then yeah, the Shaman should just do its job. It's very interesting. So let's move on to the next lineup. So the next we have is RDU, pretty much the same lineup as Thijs. So he also has the Token Shaman instead of the Control Paladin as Tyler. As you guys can see, again, no Skulking Geist in any of the decks. So again, Jade Druid is what he's gonna ban. 3 out of 3 players are going to ban Jade Druid, and they expect Jade Druid. So far everyone had Jade Druid, Kazakus Priest and Jaina Mage. This is like pretty much the same. Again, he has the Token Shaman, same thinking. Against other aggressive decks, it should be the best aggressive deck. They both think that this should be also a deck that should get a win against Priest. But again, it should be a slight disadvantage against the Jaina Mage. It should definitely be favored against Shaman. So I kind of like the Control Paladin a little bit more. I don't really want to underestimate the Shaman, but I think that the Shaman gets countered by the Kazakus Priest and the Mage naturally. So if this trend continues and they all have these 3 decks, like the Jaina Mage, the Reno Priest and the Jade Druid, the anti-aggro Jade Druid, I think Shaman will really struggle in getting a win. And this is very interesting so far. Not too much else to talk about because it's the exact same lineup as Thijs. The next lineup we have is from Sintolol. If you guys don't know who Sintolol is, he's one of the highest point earners, if not number 1 from Europe. He is performing really well time and time again over the past years, and he's also definitely one of the top contenders for this summer preliminaries. A little bit different than the previous 3 lineups. He also has the Jade Druid and the Kazakus Priest. On top of it, he has the Murloc Paladin and the Pirate Warrior. So the very first thing that comes to my mind when you look at this lineup is, yes, there's no Skulking Geist in the Priest, but that is the only deck where you would kind of like to have a Skulking Geist if you would face Druid. But then again, it's not so good to run a Skulking Geist in Reno Priest. Just as you guys can see, there's a lot of 1-mana spells in the deck. You have the Pin-Size Potion, Potion of Madness, Powered Shield and Holy Smite. So if you would not face a Jade Druid, it's pretty bad. I think with this lineup, you can have a flex ban. You can still decide to go for a Druid ban like every other player, but it is not that obvious. I think he can afford to just, flexibly ban something that targets aggro. For example, if he would face Thijs' lineup or RDU's lineup and he thinks that he will struggle with the Shaman, he can easily just decide to ban the Shaman if he wants to, because he has pretty damn good matchups with the Pirate Warrior and the Murloc Paladin against the Jade Druid. I would say that Murloc Paladin and Pirate Warrior are the best decks to fight the current Jade Druids from the mid-range slash aggressive decks. So this is a very cool and interesting lineup. Sintolol is one of the best Pirate Warrior players in the world. Like, nobody probably played the deck as much as him, so he probably feels also very confident in just, you know, outplaying people in the mirror or fighting other aggressive decks. And, you know, if people are not running Golakka crawlers, then yeah, you're not too afraid of that. Overall, the lineup is pretty cool, just because it's not super obvious as with the other lineups what you're going to ban. And if you know what your opponent has to ban, so far all the other players have to ban the Jade Druid, and that has obviously one big disadvantage. It gives your opponent the free information of the ban, so he can take advantage of that. He knows, okay, my opponent will ban the Jade Druid, and then I can just take advantage of that and, you know, ban accordingly. So very cool. The overall power level of Murloc Paladin and Pirate Warrior is extremely strong. It's almost the same power level as Jade Druid. If you want to put this in tier classes, the power level of Jade Druid is probably S tier, and Pirate Warrior and Murloc Paladin is kind of like tier 1 together with the Kazakus Priest. So overall, on paper, these are probably the 4 archetypes with the strongest power level. The overall strategy is powerful. The weak link of the strategy might be the Pirate Warrior. If you face, you know, the anti-aggro lineup, you can still struggle with the Pirate Warrior to get a win. So far we haven't seen any hungry crabs from the other players, but we have seen a lot of Golakka crawlers. Tyler, for example, ran the double Doomsayer on top of one Golakka crawler. I like the strategy. There's definitely a risk, and if he loses, it will the weakest link of his deck lineup will probably be the Pirate Warrior, just because he faces 4 anti-aggro decks with Doomsayers and Golakka crawlers. Let's move on to the next lineup. So the next lineup is from the World Champion of 2015, Ostkaka. It's pretty much the same lineup as from Sintolol, which is super interesting to see. Double aggro decks with the Pirate Warrior and the Murloc Paladin. It's a very unique Murloc Paladin with the Storm Watchers and the Corpse Taker. We've seen such a list from the Czech team that won a HGG just like 1 week ago. Again, double Doomsayer, Jade Druid and Kazakus Priest, as from pretty much all other players. So 5 from 5 players have those 2 archetypes, and the lists are pretty much the same. Yes, I know that Kazakus Priest is cut off, but they pretty much all have the same lists. Very cycle heavy with the Loot Hoarders, Talnos and Acolytes and those cards. You know, just very few cards different. What is more interesting for me is not the tech cards, but the overall lineup and the strategy. Again, same as with Sintolol, the ban is very flexible, so maybe these players prioritize that. It is definitely like a strategic advantage to have a flex ban, just to be able to leave Jade Druid open, so you can just, you know, always target that. If the Jade Druid is, for example, too greedy, then you would like to leave it open. But if you see that people are running double Doomsayer Jade Druid with Golakka Crawler, I don't think you will, you know, have the balls to go up against that. I can see Ostkaka or Sintolol in some cases leaving the Jade Druid open, so they have a slight advantage definitely in the ban scenario, because their opponents will not have that free information from the beginning with just knowing what they will ban, other than in the contrary of them just, you know, knowing that the opponents will ban Jade Druid, because it's very obvious for some lineups that they have to ban the Jade Druid. So again, it's not just that it will come down to yeah, if the Pirate Warrior can get wins. Usually Pirate Warrior should be able to, you know, just draw the nuts and take it, run away with the win of, you know, even against counter decks sometimes, because sometimes they just don't draw the Golakka or Doomsayers even though they are running those. But what is very interesting, Pirate Warrior has been performing the last preliminaries as well. I think some people qualified with Pirate Warrior. Aggressive decks are in general performing very well, especially if people go greedy. I think even though the Priest is kind of tagged against aggressive decks, Priest definitely is unfavored against Pirate Warrior. And what it might come down to is the Priest Mirror. Yeah, the Priest Mirror, and they're kind of soft targeting Priest, which is very cool. I mean, if you expect everyone to bring Kazakus Priest and Jade Druid and you ban the Jade Druid, and you just, you know, soft target the priest. Priest is definitely not good versus Murloc Paladin and Pirate Warrior, so... But even if you get a win with those two decks, you still have to play the Priest Mirror, and if it comes down to Priest Mirror, it might just come down to draws, honestly, like who draws the Kazakus, Razar and Anduin first, and all the card draw, and how the cards align, but it's definitely gonna be interesting to watch. But overall, it's just a very different approach to target Priest instead of aggressive decks as like Thijs and RDU do. So the next lineup I want to talk about is from Nicslay. Again, a top point earner over the past few years, top contender in the preliminaries time and time again. The same Kazakus Priest, Jade Druid as all other players, double Doomsayer also with the double spreading plague, so super anti-aggro. This time he has a Gluttonous Ooze, which might be a little bit interesting, so he expects some Pirate Warriors for sure. Yeah, Taunt Warrior, so far the first player that brings that, and the Jaina Mage without Jaina, just more like just a standard Freeze Mage, which is super surprising. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how good that or how well this is gonna perform, but definitely interesting. So again, very obvious ban with the Druid ban, very obvious targets with the Taunt Warrior and the Freeze Mage. He's targeting aggressive decks for sure. Yeah, all his decks are very good tagged versus aggressive decks. He might struggle against Priest. It really depends on how good Priest is against Taunt Warrior and Freeze Mage. I think it should be good versus Freeze Mage. You're running the heal potion, you have the Anduin, you know, you have the 0 mana hero power, you have silences, you have a lot of cycle. Yeah, you just run a lot of heal in the deck, and I don't know, I don't think the mage matchup is too bad, especially when you don't run Jaina. If you're facing Jaina, Jaina really has like a lot of resources, and Jaina might counter you. It is definitely a big deal that his mage is only Freeze Mage. I don't think Freeze Mage is that good, you know, it's got indirectly nerfed by everyone just having the decay, which is an additional 5 free armor. So overall, I'm not a big fan of just pure Freeze Mage. I really like the Jaina Burn Mage more. It should be much more powerful against control decks, but yeah, super obvious ban with the Druid, targets aggressive decks, so he might be much stronger against aggressive decks than the other lineups, because yeah, Taunt Warrior and Freeze Mage, but yeah, his Priest might still suffer, because as we have seen with the other lineups, people tend to go for Pirate Warrior and Murloc Paladin, and those decks are actually very good versus Priest, so I can see him struggling getting a win with the Priest. I think that people are maybe overrating the power level of Priest against aggressive decks. I don't think it is consistent enough against Murloc Paladin and Pirate Warrior, at least. But yeah, still very interesting strategy. So he's going for the anti-aggro strategy and going for the Druid ban. And yeah, not much else to say there. So the next lineup we have is from Neirea. And Neirea already qualified for the World Championships, but he's still trying to, you know, be the first player who gets to the regional twice. Very similar lineup to most of the other lineups. He also has an anti-aggro Jade Druid, Kazakus Priest, and he also has Freeze Mage, the same as Nicslay, and a Taunt Warrior. What is interesting about his Taunt Warrior is that he has like the Blood Razor tagged and one Dirty Red, and yeah, so interesting. He also goes for an anti-aggro approach. Very obvious ban again with the Jade Druid, so very similar tendencies. As you guys can see, most of these players know what to expect from the other players. Their approach is in two directions. Some people try to target the aggressive decks that they expect from the other players, and some players are trying to target or zone out the Priest or soft target Mage, which they're expecting, or just get some edge versus the other control decks. This is again very interesting. I think that the Mage might struggle. I don't like the overall power level of pure Freeze Mage, as I said. I don't like the lineup where you just bring a pure Freeze Mage. I prefer the Jaina Mage definitely more, because I think it's better versus the control decks, and it should be better versus Priest as well, but I don't know how much these guys have play tested. Maybe they know percentages which I don't. Again, very interesting strategy. They might just, you know, forfeit the Priest matchup and focus on the aggressive decks that they are expecting, and as we have seen, about half of the players bring two aggressive decks on top of the Kazakus Priest and the Jade Druid, and half of the players are bringing, you know, anti-aggressive decks. It depends on how lucky they get, because if they face a player that has two aggressive decks, they should definitely have an edge with the super anti-aggro decks. If they're facing a player with a similar strategy, it comes down to who has the better control decks. If Neirea would face Tyler, for example, I kind of like the Control Paladin, the Nerve Control Paladin against Mage and Taunt Warrior better, so I think he would have an edge. If Neirea would face a pure aggro lineup, not pure aggro, it's usually Kazakus Priest and Jade Druid with two aggro decks, then he maybe have a little bit of an edge. Even though I kind of like Tyler's approach with, you know, soft targeting Mage with the Control Paladin and still be pretty strong against aggressive decks, because he was running the double Doomsayer and the Golakka. The next player we have is Naiman. Let's kick this off with Jade Druid and Kazakus Priest. 8 out of 8 so far. It usually, as you guys can see, the trend is continuing. It really comes down to the two remaining decks. Again, very obvious Jade Druid ban, no Skulking Geist, Taunt Warrior, which is obviously very bad versus Jade Druid. Very anti-aggro again, double Doomsayer in Druid, Taunt Warrior and Control Paladin. This Control Paladin also has the Golakka, so very similar to Tyler. Again, Kazakus Priest and Jade Druid. So what is there to say? Hard targeting, aggressive decks. I kind of like having the Taunt Warrior over the Freeze Mage or Jaina Mage, because it should be favored against the mages. So if you're facing a lineup that has Jade Druid, Kazakus Priest and Jaina Mage, I kind of like having a non-mage lineup with the Control Paladin and the Taunt Warrior, so you should definitely have like an edge there, depending on how powerful actually the Jaina is going to be against those decks. So super interesting, and I like this lineup a lot. The only small downside compared to like Sintolol's and Ostkaka's lineup is that the ban is like super obvious with Jade Druid ban. So the next player we have is Hoej, another player that already qualified for the World Championships, but same as with Neirea, he wants to redeem himself and be the first player to go to the regional twice. Yeah, what does he bring? Again, same as every other player so far, Kazakus, Priest and Jade Druid. Very similar lists. I don't really want to get into the individual text too much. Some people are playing Mind Vision in Priests, some people are not. He decided to bring Jaina Mage and the Token Shaman. Again, very similar approach. Token Shaman, the best deck versus other aggressive decks from the aggressive decks, and Jaina Mage is one of the best anti-aggro decks in the game, if not the best anti-aggro deck. So yeah, very obvious ban with the Jade Druid ban, and yeah, so far he's predicting other people to bring aggressive decks, and yeah, he might struggle with the Shaman, as I said, against the anti-aggro lineups. The lineups that have Taunt Warrior and Jaina Mage, for example, with the Kazakus Priest, they should be very good versus the lineups that have a Token Shaman in it. The lineups that we've seen so far, the people that have Shaman should have a disadvantage a little bit, just because of Taunt Warrior and Jaina Mage is being pretty good against that. So is the Kazakus Priest, so yeah, it's just like a slight disadvantage. The final lineup I want to take a look at is Fenomeno's lineup, and now finally 10 out of 10 people brought Jade Druid and Kazakus Priest. The only difference lies in the remaining two decks, and again, very obvious Jade Druid ban, so I believe 8 out of the 10 players are obviously gonna ban Jade Druid. Ostkaka and Sintolol have a slightly more flexible ban, which is super interesting in my opinion. Again, he decided to go for the Token Shaman and for the Jaina Mage. So 6 people are going for the Jaina mage. The players that have the Jaina mage as a soft target in mind should definitely have a slight edge over the players that are just bringing the Jaina mage, just because so many people are going to bring the Jaina mage, and also the people that are targeting aggressive decks with all their lineup, with their entire lineup, are also gonna have an edge against the people that bring the token shaman. This is my conclusion. I think it is enough to just take a look at 10 lineups of some of the most popular or the most powerful players. Almost everyone has Jade Druid, almost everyone has Kazakus Priest. I like the flexibility of Ostkaka's and Sintolol's lineup, but yeah, they might, you know, just lose to the natural habit of having bad draws with Pirate Warrior, or, you know, just get Golakkat. Overall, very interesting, and that's about that. That's it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful, and if you should do more of these type of videos in the future, and if I could, you know, give you some insight behind the players' lineups and their strategies. And yeah, I'm streaming every day from around 12 p.m. CET till around 6 p.m. CET, so you can join me there as well. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Hope you guys enjoyed it as always, and see you guys then. Peace!